Rudgwick's Romantic Disposition by C.H. Bovill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Ed Humple. All I ask of life, murmured Rudgwick, gazing dreamily out to sea, is to be loved for myself. For yourself? What do you mean? Laughed Miss Tompkins, looking at him mischievously. You don't expect anyone to love you for Harry Lauder or the Archbishop of Canterbury, do you? Rudgwick explained that when he said loved for himself, he meant as opposed to being loved for his money. But you haven't got any, objected Miss Tompkins, who found the cold facts of life quite sufficiently puzzling without these unnecessary excursions into the realms of hypothesis. But suppose I had, persisted the young man, with all a lover's obstinacy, £10,000 a year, say, would you still love me? Miss Tompkins was dubious. I dare say I should still be fond of you, in a sort of way, she admitted, after some thought. But I expect I should find myself getting gradually more and more drawn to your income. But why let us talk about it? You haven't got it. If you had, it would simply spoil everything. Mistaking Rudgwick's look of anxiety for one of astonishment, Miss Tompkins hastened to explain. The dream of my life has always been to marry some dear, nice man, she pressed Rudgwick's hand affectionately, who was quite poor, and to help him and inspire him in his struggle up the ladder of success. That's what I'm going to do for you. Don't you think it will be just splendid? Splendid, agreed Rudgwick, who had never struggled up anything without the assistance of a lift. Absolutely gorgeous. Very well then, dear, said Miss Tompkins, holding out her hand so that he might help her up from the shingle. If somebody dies and leaves you a lot of money just before our wedding day, you'd better not tell me anything about it, or I shall probably throw you over in favor of some poor but honest rival. The words were lightly spoken, but they succeeded, with some little assistance from a typical seaside mattress, in keeping Rudgwick awake half the night. Over and over again he asked himself, as he tossed and turned, was he to lose the happiness which had seemed to be within his grasp, simply because a wicked uncle had elected to saddle him with an incubus of something like £250,000 sterling? Rudgwick's case was peculiarly deserving. He suffered from an incurably romantic disposition. Do what he would, it never seemed to get any better. Now, to be romantic in any circumstances is difficult enough, goodness knows, but to be romantic in circumstances which are disgustingly comfortable is practically impossible. Rudgwick found this out at a very early stage in his career. Still he continued to do his best, though the results were far from encouraging. As he had quite truthfully explained to Miss Tompkins, all he asked of life was to be loved for himself. Not much to ask, perhaps, but with so formidable a rival as an income running well into 5 figures, one is not likely to get it. Rudgwick, in point of fact, did not get it, or even go near getting it. What used to happen, with monotonous regularity, was this. Rudgwick would get engaged, without any difficulty, to some charming girl who knew all about the very satisfactory state of his investments, and then, just as his friends were beginning to search for the best shop at which to buy something costing not more than 30 shillings, suitable for presentation to a wealthy man from whom much subsequent hospitality was to be expected, that ass would go and, as he called it, test the sincerity of his fiancée's affections, by suddenly announcing to her that he had lost all his money except a beggarly £300 a year. One or two of the darlings, I believe, had the immortal impudence to murmur some amusing nonsense to the effect that it was only the reluctance to being a drag on a young man just on the threshold of life that compelled them to release him from his engagement. But most of them lost no time in calling for their big brothers to come upstairs and heave Rudgwick out into the street. Afterwards, of course, when they discovered the trick that he had played on them, they threatened him with legal proceedings, but Rudgwick paid up quite cheerfully. Anything was better, he declared, than being tied for life to a woman who did not love you. Friendly attempts to make him understand that this was not half so exhausting as being tied for life to a woman who did love you, he received with disfavor. Consequently, when Rudgwick met Miss Tompkins on the esplanade of one of our most popular seaside resorts, and decided, directly their eyes met, that the only possible girl had at last come into his life, he also decided that on this occasion his love story would begin a little differently. Never again would he give himself the trouble of falling passionately in love with a woman, only to discover, after living blissfully in a fool's paradise for a time, that the facts of the case compelled an affirmative reply to the torturing question, "Is it my money she wants?" This time the object of his adoration should be given not the slightest inkling that he was a man of means, until she had shown that she possessed sufficient force of character to love a man for what he was, and not for what he had got. Then she should have her reward. In the meantime she should be wooed in some modest, yet withal gentlemanly guise. After mature consideration, Rudgwick came to the conclusion that the role of bank clerk combined modesty and gentility in about the most suitable proportions. A woman did not love a bank clerk because he was a bank clerk, but because, in spite of the souring nature of his occupation, he had contrived to remain a very charming fellow. It was, then, as Mr. Ballpen, a bank clerk on his holiday, that Rudgwick, having vacated his palatial quarters at the Esplanade Hotel, took up his abode at Magenta House, the select boarding establishment to which he had tracked the fair unknown. Rudgwick had never been in a boarding house before, the best rooms in the best available hotel having hitherto always met his modest needs quite satisfactorily. But for the sake of settling himself comfortably in life, he was prepared to run some risks. Once established in Magenta House, Rudgwick lost no time in setting about the task of winning Miss Tompkins' young affections. And they were worth winning, in spite of the fact that her papa was apparently not one of the old noblesse, to be precise, he was a speculative builder of some eminence, and that her relentless godparents had pushed her out onto life's stormy waters with such a millstone as Ermyntrude about her neck. She was about as nice a girl as any man could wish to meet. Ermyntrude, it must be confessed, was a bit of a shock to Rudgwick just at first. Like most of us, he had always imagined that it was the Mrs. Harris of feminine nomenclature, invented by alleged comic authors for their own blackguardly purposes. To discover that not only did such a name exist, but was actually borne by the very woman with whom he had every intention of falling madly in love, was rather overwhelming. For the matter of that, though, his own name was Oswald, so undoubtedly there would have to be a fair amount of give and take on both sides. Before he had enjoyed 5 minutes of her acquaintance, Rudgwick had the good fortune to do something that attracted Miss Tompkins' very favourable attention. The guests at Magenta House were discussing, sotto voce, the hot lunch (much virtue, unless the prospectus lied, lay in that matter of temperature), and Rudgwick had just had placed before him some savoury mess that a subtle instinct of self-preservation warned him would probably be a little too rich for his comparatively untrained digestion. Debating what he should do, Rudgwick's eye rested thoughtfully on Sancho, the dog of the house, a pug, well on in his teens, who spent most of his time wandering asthmatically about the rooms, tripping people up, and making himself generally obnoxious. After lunch, when they were all standing out on the front doorstep, hoping that the sea breeze might pull them together a little, Miss Tompkins commented favourably upon Rudgwick's fondness for animals. "It was good of you, Mr. Ballpen," she exclaimed, admiringly. "Fancy giving all the best bits off your plate to that horrid little pug. I like to see a man denying himself for the sake of a dog. Generally, men are so greedy." Rudgwick gave a careless, "Oh, that's nothing" sort of laugh, and explained to her that dogs were a passion with him. He would do anything for a dog. Then Miss Tompkins told him about her dog. It was a wonderful animal, it seemed, quite the talk of the suburb from which Miss Tompkins hailed. She had been thinking of showing it, only the difficulty was to know for which class it ought to be entered. The experts appeared to be divided as to whether it was a Dachshund or a red setter. It had such a look of both breeds. Rudgwick hastened to say that if Miss Tomkins would allow him to call when he got back to town and inspect the dog, probably he would be able to give her an authoritative opinion, one way or the other. He rather hinted that the Kennel Club frequently consulted him as a sort of unofficial referee to unravel these intricate cases. Miss Tomkins thanked him very graciously for his kind offer, and said that she would speak to Pa about it. A fortnight later, under the lee of breakwater number 27, Miss Tomkins was confessing shyly to Rudgwick that she did love him. He could hardly believe his ears. Earth, sea, and sky became mingled in one vast blur. The music of a million harps swept through the air. Was it possible that at last he had found true love? Thinking, from his wildly skeptical expression, that he had perhaps not heard her aright, Miss Tomkins repeated her words. "Yes, dear Oswald, I do love you, and I will be yours." The turbulence of Rudgwick's emotions found expression at last in one painfully stammered word. "Why?" The question was just a little startling, but Miss Tomkins, after a momentary hesitation, answered quite frankly. "Well, dear, as you ask me, I will tell you. I love you, not because you are particularly good-looking or clever, but because you are nice. And I am willing to marry you because I do think you want a woman to look after you more than any man I ever met. I shall be able to give you just the help you need." Just as Rudgwick was about to fold her in his arms and assure her that the only help he would require from his sweet little wife would be in the direction of spending his superfluous wealth, Miss Tomkins went on. "Papa will be furious, though. I'm afraid he will never give his consent. But I don't care. I will marry you without it." This was the point at which Rudgwick's romantic disposition elected to butt in and proceed to play the hopeless fool. It had been his intention to reveal to Miss Tomkins the truth about himself directly he was assured that she loved him for his own sake and not for the sake of what he had got. But her last remark suggested possibilities which Rudgwick felt he simply could not allow to go unexploited. Hitherto the course of true love had always been for him as smooth as a water chute. At the slightest indication of a penchant, the lady, her parents, and everybody concerned tumbled over themselves in their anxiety to make things as easy for him as possible. But here was a vastly different state of affairs. A delicious vista of clandestine meetings, stormy scenes with an infuriated father, and possibly, glory of glories, an elopement at the end of it all, spread itself before Rudgwick's mental vision. To cut this moving drama short at the end of the very first act would be nothing short of a crime. So Rudgwick allowed the poor innocent girl at his side to rattle on with her clever schemes for making ends meet on an income of less than £150 a year. While things were going on in this pleasant serio-comic fashion, Ermentrude's father suddenly took it into his head one Saturday morning that he would like to run down and spend a week-end in his daughter's society. He gave no intimation of his coming, his idea being to afford his daughter a pleasant little surprise. As things turned out, it was Mr. Tomkins who got the little surprise. Rather unfortunately, Rudgwick and Ermentrude were out when he arrived, so Mr. Tomkins had an opportunity to enjoy a long and somewhat perturbing chat with the chatelaine of Magenta House, a lady amongst whose faults a lack of powers of observation or undue secretiveness could certainly not be reckoned. Matters of the first importance, to which Ermentrude had not made the remotest reference in her daily picture postcard to the home circle, were brought to Mr. Tomkins' knowledge. His matter, when his daughter and Rudgwick came in together to tea, after a long delirious tete-a-tete behind their favourite breakwater, was the reverse of genial. "I didn't catch your name," he said truculently to Rudgwick, when Ermentrude, obviously flustered by the unexpected apparition of her papa, had floundered through an incoherent introduction. "My name," said Rudgwick pleasantly, "is Ballpen, Oswald Ballpen." "Ballpen?" Ball pen, said Mr. Tompkins, turning the name distastefully on his tongue, as if he were a wine taster about to pass sentence on some alleged claret. I want to have a few words with you, Mr. Ball pen. Certainly, was Rudgwick's affable rejoinder. He leant easily against the mantelpiece, prepared to listen cheerfully to anything which Mr. Tompkins might have to say. Suddenly he caught sight of Ermentrude making violent signals to him from behind her father's back to sit down. Slightly mystified, he took her pantomimic advice, for which he was afterwards not sorry. Miss Tompkins knew what she was about. She had seen her father having a few words with young men before. "And now, Mr. Ball pen," said Tompkins père, leaning forward in his seat, with a fat hand planted aggressively on either knee, and plunging with praiseworthy directness in media res, "I should like you just to tell me what you mean by having the sauce to make up to my daughter. What are you, hey?" "I'm a clerk in a bank," replied Rudgwick, with unruffled composure. He had never before enjoyed the experience of being regarded as an undesirable party, and he found it delightful. "I'm a clerk in a bank, and as you are evidently of an inquiring turn of mind, I may add that my salary is at present £110 per annum. Some day, if I am lucky, it may be a little more. Not much, though." A large vein in Mr. Tompkins' forehead began to behave like a cinematograph picture. He turned to his daughter and said, in an awful voice, "Leave the room, Ermentrude. I'm going to talk." "Nonsense," said Rudgwick, laying a detaining hand on Miss Tompkins' arm, as she rose hastily to obey the paternal mandate. "Stay where you are, dear. We're both on in this performance." Performance was undoubtedly the word, though Rudgwick had long ago lost sight of the fact that he was only playing a part. "May I ask," demanded Mr. Tompkins, after a brief struggle with some obscure laryngital trouble, "if you propose to marry my daughter, Mr. Ballspond?" "I do," was Rudgwick's terse reply. "I love her, and she has given me to understand that she loves me. There does not therefore seem to be anything in the way of our happiness." "Loves you!" howled Mr. Tompkins, rising from his chair so that his emotions might have freer play. "Loves you! A rat of a clerk!" He rendered the offensive word doubly so by making it rhyme with work. "A rat of a bank clerk, when the biggest house and estate agency in North London is only waiting for a suitable opportunity to say the word to her! Do you think a daughter of mine is going to pig it on £110 per annum when she could have the thick end of 2,000? Do you think she's clean off her onion?" "No," replied Rudgwick blandly, "although that vegetable appears with unnecessary frequency at the table here. I cannot say that Ermentrude has yet shown any marked symptoms of satiety." Mr. Tompkins seized from the mantelpiece behind him a colossal mock Dresden vase, which had been giving Rudgwick bad dreams ever since his first view of it, and balanced it in his twitching fingers for a minute or more. Then, to Rudgwick's deep regret, he replaced it, uninjured. "Then might I further ask," inquired Mr. Tompkins, when his voice was once more under control, "whether you think I'm going to keep you, or have you," this with biting sarcasm, "private money of your own?" "I have no private means," answered Rudgwick boldly. He was determined to put Ermentrude's affection to the severest possible test. "But that really doesn't matter, Mr. Tompkins," he went on cheerfully. "There are other things in this world besides money. You don't know it, but I know it, and Ermentrude, God bless her, knows it too." Ermentrude did know it. Before her eyes there swam a beatific vision of herself mothering this helpless young man along life's stormy way. "Now, look here," said Mr. Tompkins, squaring himself resolutely. "I've had enough of this rot. It's sickening. Ermentrude, go and pack your box. You come back to London with me on the very next train. As for you, Mr. Balderdash," Mr. Tompkins seemed to find some slight measure of relief in these variations of what he fondly imagined to be Rudgwick's name, "as for you, if I ever catch you trying to communicate with my daughter again, in any form whatsoever, well, you look out, that's all." "Thanks," replied Rudgwick quietly. "I will." Mr. Tompkins was as good as his word. In half an hour Ermentrude, weeping wildly out of the window of a rickety fly, was being borne towards the station. Rudgwick waited on the steps of Magenta House only long enough to wave her out of sight, and then hurried round to the garage. His chauffeur being, as a result of 3 weeks' idleness, a great deal too intoxicated to be entrusted with the guidance of anything more complicated than a wheelbarrow, Rudgwick drove himself back to town, singing wildly to himself as the car flew over the roads. Life was worth living after all, he told himself. Romance was not yet dead. Then followed for Rudgwick the happiest 3 months that he had ever known. Existence ceased to be a dreary, drab reality, and became instead a delightful comedy, at which Rudgwick sat and watched his own adventures with breathless interest. Incredible strategy was required to keep up communications with Ermentrude. The intelligence which he expended merely upon smuggling his voluminous correspondence into her hands was in excess of all the previous intellectual efforts of his life put together. Rudgwick was seen no more at race meetings, to which the bankruptcy of more than one Leviathan of the Ring was directly attributed. His motor cars ceased to enrich country exchequers. The wits of his various clubs had to search for new inspiration. Rudgwick had no time for anything but waiting at street corners in the rain on the off chance of being able to steal 5 minutes' hurried conversation with the object of his affections. So much ardor, however, did he contrive to compress into these brief interviews that at last, after saying no fewer than 200 times that she would never do it, Ermentrude consented one morning to elope with him on the following Tuesday. She thoughtfully selected Tuesday because that was her father's busy day. The houses he had finished on the previous Saturday fell down on Tuesday, or something of that kind. Rudgwick could scarcely contain himself when he heard her whisper assent to his complicated scheme. "My darling," he cried, in tones of rapture so ecstatic as to cause the waitress (they were in a tea shop) to come over and ask if he felt ill. "My darling," he went on in a cavernous whisper, when the waitress had haughtily retired out of earshot, "can it really be that you love me enough to make this sacrifice for my sake?" Miss Tompkins, who, thanks to paternal behavior, was finding the assertion that there is no place like home to be capable of more than one interpretation, assured her adorer that flying into his arms was not at all in the nature of a sacrifice. "But I'm so poor," murmured Rudgwick sadly, watching her narrowly out of the corner of his eye. "Well, of course, 110 per ann isn't much," admitted Miss Tompkins, "but I can manage. You see if I can't. But you'll be getting your rise soon, with me at your side to inspire you, and anyhow, Papa is sure to come around." "Not to our house, I hope," said Rudgwick anxiously. As they walked home arm in arm in the gloom of the December evening, they settled the details of their plans for the momentous Tuesday. Early in the morning, long before the rest of the household was astir, Ermentrude was to slip out the side gate and join her lover, who would have a taxicab waiting down the road. A brief visit to the registry office, lunch at the Trocadero (Miss Tompkins opened her eyes at the magnificence of this item), and then off for a happy fortnight to some jolly seaside place, the exact locality of which Rudgwick refused for the time being to divulge. He smiled to himself as he thought of what Ermentrude would say when she found out the jolly seaside place was Monte Carlo. At 6:45 on a foggy December morning, the streets of London are uninviting. Rudgwick, shivering in the bleak air, found that romance has its trials as well as its joys. Anticipation of the day before him had kept him awake practically all night, and he had an extremely bad cold in the head. Much as he loved Ermentrude, he could find it in his heart to be vexed with her for being 20 minutes behind time. If a woman could not be punctual for her elopement, what could she be punctual for? It was cold hanging about in this raw air, and a tiresome policeman kept coming up and looking at him in a very annoying way. Rudgwick made his way cautiously toward the side gate of the Tompkins mansion. It was so dark that, even if anybody was about, there was no danger of his being recognized. Not a sign of Ermentrude anywhere. Growing desperate with impatience, he opened the gate very quietly and put his head and shoulders inside. Instantaneously he found himself roughly seized by two men who leapt from behind the wall and thrown heavily to the ground. One of the men, approximate weight as estimated by Rudgwick at the time, 20 stone, knelt on his chest, while the other blew a police whistle with disturbing violence. The officious policeman, of whose face Rudgwick had grown so tired during his vigil outside, came lumbering up to the scene. A voice which Rudgwick recognized as that of Ermentrude's father suggested, "We'll take the perishing little image into the greenhouse." "Right you are, sir," said the officious constable. "I've had him under observation for some time. I believe we shall find he's somebody." "Yes, I dare say we shall," agreed Mr. Tompkins dryly. "You don't suppose I should want your help if it was nobody, do you? There, take hold of his legs." Between them they carried Rudgwick, his clothes a mass of clammy mold, into the greenhouse, and sat him on the floor with his back against an empty barrel. "And now we're going to have a little chat," said Mr. Tompkins, carefully closing the door of the greenhouse. "Constable!" exclaimed Rudgwick, pointing an accusing finger at Mr. Tompkins, "I give that man in charge for a most unwarrantable assault, of which you were a witness." When the constable had done wiping his eyes, and had told the others for the 4th time how much the magistrate would enjoy this joke when he heard it, and had made a careful note of the prisoner's bon mot in his book, Mr. Tompkins said, "Oh, I know this chap well, constable. He goes in for being a comic. That's not half so funny as some of the things he says and does. He came here this morning to elope with my daughter. That's not bad, is it?" "Elope with your daughter, sir!" exclaimed the policeman, in horrified accents. "That's most suspicious. What is he, might I ask?" "He says he's a bank clerk," said Mr. Tompkins, looking at Rudgwick with ineffable contempt. "A bank clerk on £110 per annum." "In that case, sir," said the constable very decidedly, "I think we'd better search him." Rudgwick's temperature dropped a few more degrees with apprehension. Only the day before he had called at the bank to lay up a good supply of funds for the honeymoon. Rudgwick's idea of what constituted a cozy little sum for a month's jaunt on the continent ran well into 4 figures. At the present moment he had on his person banknotes to the value of something like £1,200. And there was another thing. Only the week before the bank had been defrauded of large sums by a very ingenious swindler. Rudgwick remembered that yesterday he had chaffed the cashier about it while the latter was getting him his money. The cashier did not seem to think the incident so humorous as Rudgwick had tried to make out. Supposing the constable found this large sum of money on him, in notes stamped with the impress of the very bank which all the world knew had been so recently robbed, good heavens! He might think the worst. It was exactly what the constable did think. Very few constables ever think anything else. P.C. Parker's eyes grew bigger and bigger as he counted the notes in Rudgwick's case. When he had got over the 1,000, hope gave way to certainty. P.C. Parker saw himself a sergeant on a comfortable West End beat. P.C. Parker also saw himself receiving a very handsome present from a grateful board of directors. "Good heavens!" he cried, trembling with excitement. "I believe we've got the man that robbed the London and Northwestern Bank. I've heard that one of the clerks was suspected. I must take this chap to the station at once, sir." "Must you?" Mr. Tompkins' tone implied acute disappointment. "Couldn't you let me step on and off him once or twice before he goes?" "You'd better," he urged, as the constable shook his head doubtfully. "He might be violent if we don't hammer a little of the devil out of him as a precaution." The constable was just beginning to show some signs of giving way to Mr. Tompkins' kindly importunity, when the door of the greenhouse was flung violently open and Ermentrude tottered in, followed by 2 dishevelled domestics. "We tried to hold her, sir, as you told us," one of them panted, "but she fought like a demon." By this time Ermentrude was on her knees at Rudgwick's side. "My poor darling," she moaned, kissing his grimy cheeks, "what have these wretches done to you?" Rudgwick gave her to understand in a faint voice that the recital of what they had not done would involve less of a physical strain. Ermentrude turned flashing eyes upon her father. "I'll never forgive you for this, never." "That'll do, her father replied, not unkindly. You'll forgive me fast enough, and you'll be everlasting grateful to me for having saved you from this young scoundrel. Do you know what he is? A thief. The man that robbed the London and Northwestern Bank. Look at that." He pointed to the bundle of notes in the constable's hand. £1,450, I make it, announced P.C. Parker in a tone which implied that grave suspicion would attach to anybody who made it something else. "Where could a chap on 110 a year get all that money?" demanded Mr. Tompkins relentlessly of his daughter. "It's as clear as mud that he stole it, to elope with you." "How much will he get, do you think?" faltered Miss Tompkins, after a heartbreaking pause. "5 years, if he's lucky," came the reply from the legal expert present. Ermentrude turned to Rudgwick and murmured shakily, "Oswald, I'll wait for you. I know it was wrong of you to steal, but you did it for my sake. I'm to blame as much as you are." Rudgwick opened his eyes and looked around him wearily. He had had about enough romance for one morning. "My name," he said dully, "is not Ballpen, but Rudgwick, as that intelligent ass in blue will discover if he takes the trouble to look a little more closely into that pocketbook of mine. I'm not a bank clerk. I'm romantic. That's what's the matter with me. But I don't think I shall ever have a recurrence of the attack. I pretended to be a bank clerk for reasons which nobody here, not even you, Ermentrude, would understand. If you will kindly telephone to the address on my card and ask them to send one of my motors here to take me home, I shall be very much obliged." It was a long time before they could be persuaded to do it. When the motor car at last arrived, with Rudgwick's valet and his doctor and the manager of the bank and several other people who seemed to be very much perturbed at seeing his condition, Rudgwick asked to be left alone for a few minutes with Miss Tompkins. "Well, Ermentrude, I suppose it's got to be good-bye," he said sadly, when the sound of Mr. Tompkins' excited explanations and apologies had been partially deadened by an intervening door. "I'm not very poor, unfortunately, and I rather gather that a poor and struggling husband whom you could help and look after is the only sort you could have any use for." "My dear boy," replied Ermentrude, with robust good sense, "you want looking after more than any human being I ever met. I don't intend ever to let you out of my sight again." End of Rudgwick's Romantic Disposition by C. H. Bovill.